Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Now I'm going to explain about what is process costing. So process costing, as I said earlier, this is the method applicable where goods or services result from a sequence of continuous or repetitive operation or processes. So you can see when you want to calculate the cost will be averaged over the unit produced during the period being initially charged to the operation or process. This is the SEMA definition of what is a process costing. So basically, process costing is a form of continuous operation costing, as we have seen earlier, whereby costs are charged to processes or operations and average over the unit produced. So when is process costing being used? So normally it is being used by firms when there is a continuous flow of identical or homogeneous products. So you have identical products, a lot of things in the market that you can see, you have identical products. So if that output or if that product is a result of a continuous flow of identical product, then process costing is more applicable to be used for that particular output and for when you want to calculate the cost per unit. And if the output are identical or homogeneous, it is not possible for you to distinguish one item from the other. So, for example, you can see in industries that involve in chemical processing, in oil refining, in food production. So all these things, when it involves a continuous flow of processes, okay, then your products are homogeneous or identical, very similar products that you are producing, then in that case, process costing is most suitable to be used. Okay, so for example, if you have this kind of output, okay, in the chemical processing, oil refining, or in the food production, you have a lot of identical outputs. So in that case, process costing is more suitable to be used to identify how much is the cost that you have incurred. Okay, what about the characteristics? So if you see the characteristics of process costing, so process cost centers are set up so where all the direct and indirect costs incurred during the period are charged to each process so that the total process cost for each is obtained. And then to calculate the total process cost of each process, to calculate the cost per unit, so the total process cost of each process are then shared equally among all the cost units produced in that particular process. It's basically you are finding the average or the cost per unit, okay, the average cost. So how are you going to calculate the average cost? That will be the basic idea is that how much is the cost that you have incurred. For example, if you have incurred 10,000 units, if you have incurred 10,000 units, how much is the output during that period? 10,000 units, and you have 1,000 units. So just 10,000 divided by 1,000 units. So you will have 10 ringgit per unit. So as simple as that, that's how you calculate the cost per unit. So that will be the input cost divided by the expected outputs in units. So if you have normal loss, so that will be the total cost minus the normal loss in value for the numerator, and for the denominator, you will have divided by input in terms of the quantity minus your normal loss in terms of the quantity. So you will get the cost per unit. Later on, I will explain the reason why you have to deduct the normal loss. And then for process costing as well, you will have a separate account. So you will keep a separate account for each process. Okay, and then output of one process becomes the input for the next process. For example, you involve in this, let's say you are making a table. So from the you will have three processes. For example, you have the cutting department, you have the assembly department or finishing department, or in other words, you will have a cutting process, assembly process, and finishing process. So each separate accounts are kept for each process. That means you will have three accounts. You will have one account for cutting process, one account for assembly process, and another account for the finishing process. Okay, and then output of one process becomes the input for the next process. That means you cut the log into pieces, and then from this one, so for assembly, for example, the input for assembly will be the output from the cutting process, and input for finishing process will be the output from the assembly process until you have a finished output that is your table. So these are basic characteristics of the process costing. Okay, with that, I thank you.